Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering sex education, season 5, episode 5. In this episode, y'all, I've got to be real with you. I am a little bit bored of the drama between Otis and Maeve at this point. And it's like, either we're going to just let them be happy and figure out a way to do that, or end it, please. For the love of God, I can't take this anymore. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. So this one, you guys, I'm just going to get it out of the way right now. I was feeling pretty good with the last episode and the way that Maeve let Otis in and how she seemed a little thrown to see him when he shows up with Amy to pick her up. But then she's like, no, but please come with me. I don't want you to go. And I was like, yay, she's starting to accept support and help. And then they had to do this thing with Ruby. And kids, here's the thing. And Owen watched this episode with me, and he said it in a way that I felt made the most sense. I said, I don't even get why he feels the need to confess that he spent the night with Ruby in this dramatic fashion, because they just literally fell asleep and it didn't mean anything. And Owen said because it did mean something to him and he wishes it didn't. And I was like, oh, there it is. Because I was just feeling so frustrated. He's making such a big deal out of, like, I have to tell her. And I kept thinking, you fell asleep. You were both fully clothed. You weren't under the covers. You woke up and got the hell out of there. And it was a whole very, like, innocent thing, you know? But when he put it in those terms of, like, he feels the need because he has a sense of there still being something between him and Ruby. And so it feels a lot more like there is something to confess than it looked like from the outside. It really helped me to, like, get, because that is a thing, right? Where something can be technically innocent and we will, like, be able to say in very straightforward terms what happened and it sounds like nothing. But if you were actually there, you saw what happened and the energy of it all was very different than what it sounds like when you simply say it secondhand. And this is true in two directions, where something can be described and seem like not a big deal to downplay the fact that clearly it kind of was a big deal in the moment. Or it can be an annoying thing that happens when you are trying to explain to somebody. This is something especially true with women, I find, who are trying to explain feeling threatened by a man who hasn't actually really done anything. And you try and say, like, he gave me this look and sort of, like, sidled up to me. And that'll be all the dude did. Technically, that's it. That's the end of the story. But the whole tone of it in the moment was so threatening that it sent your, like, adrenaline skyrocketing, and trying to get it across to a person that's how it felt is really tough, because it sounds like a non-story when you're telling it secondhand later, or not secondhand, but when you're telling it later. So I just really, I just don't want there to be more back and forth with them at this point. We are in season 4 here. The two of them have had a will they, won't they that has gone on this whole time. And I really want to believe that this show is the kind written by people intelligent enough that they can make things interesting even when there is a happy couple. I really want, because this is, like we all have seen how there are shows out there that fall apart when the will they, won't they is resolved. If you haven't got that sort of tension, it feels like, well, what's the plot? Nobody cares anymore. And I don't think that this show would suffer that. If Otis and Maeve got together and were actually happy with one another, there is still growing that can happen. There is still relationship drama that can be navigated. There can still be sexual problems with the two of them, or any number of things that you could explore without it just being the fundamentals of whether or not they are going to be okay together. And I really want us to get there, because this is not it to me anymore. I've just reached a point where they, as characters, it's not even like necessarily the writers anymore. The characters have to be given the opportunity to have more than a few moments together. It's difficult to know if they can be happy as a couple, because we don't really see them just hanging out in a context that's like relaxed almost ever. The two of them are always thrust into these dramatic situations that are like really high stakes, and things are very emotionally fraught in other areas of their lives at the time, so they'll feel sort of unbalanced. And I really want to see, what is it like when they are in a routine and they're just living and able to spend time with one another after school, when they're able to just explore what they have in common in a real way, instead of, and even in terms of their long distance relationship, we don't really see them communicating that much, except when they are having some kind of issue. And I would like to see a little bit more of them just liking each other, and there not being a problem or crisis that we have to deal with. And I say this with a full understanding that Maeve's mother just died. So it is unlikely that that is going to be something that comes up anytime soon. Her mother's, the way that they did this, her mom dies before her and her brother even get there. And it was 20 minutes earlier, which is a real punch to the gut. Even if they had been able to get there a half hour earlier, I don't think probably they would have been able to see her. It sounds like she was really going downhill badly enough that she would probably have been kept from them because they were busy doing their thing trying to resuscitate her. But nevertheless, as the person who has shown up 20 minutes after, you're always going to kind of feel like, what if I got there sooner and I could have done something? And not even to help them stay alive, because you can understand that's not going to be, you're not able to change that. But simply to have a moment with them where you can speak and connect one more time before they're gone. And that was something that I really struggled with my father's death. And it's always the way when there's a sudden death. I know that a prolonged illness followed by a death is also really difficult. I'm not trying to diminish that, but it has a different set of challenges to it. And when somebody dies really suddenly and unexpectedly, there is so much unfinished, and there is so much that, looking back, you're like, if only this one little thing was different, the whole thing could have gone different, My father, he had a heart attack in the middle of the night. His wife woke up to hear him sort of choking. She turned over and saw that he was beginning to turn blue. She immediately called 911. And by the time they got there, he was really he had lost consciousness, and it was too late. In that situation, there isn't a lot that could have changed to save my father, unless he happened to have the heart attack somewhere where there was immediate medical assistance, which the likelihood of that is very, very low. So I never have had that sort of like, well, maybe something could have been done to save him. My issue has always been that when my father would call me to check in, I was always busy. And this is what happens. It's life. I don't blame myself in a way that's like I was avoiding him necessarily. I wasn't. But I had that kind of attitude when he would call that we often do, where, oh God, it's my dad. I don't have time. You know, I'm in the middle of cooking dinner, or I'm about to record. I have to finish watching this episode. Any of those like daily routine things that feel more important in the moment and take precedence because they need immediate attention. And I think back now, and I'm going to get choked up. And I think about how many times he was the one who called me. My dad reached out a lot. And frankly, I resisted it because we didn't have a great relationship. It was okay, and it certainly improved in his later years. But I had a hard time talking to him. I didn't know what to say. I felt like with the language barrier, me trying to, and especially like doing podcasting, which was something that was not as much of a thing way back then, I felt like he didn't really understand what it was. And it was so much of my life at that point that I didn't know how to talk to him about something that was important to me. And he hadn't been hugely supportive about any creative endeavor in the last like decade of his life. And I felt very much like closed off after he had refused to like even co-sign a student loan for me to go back to school because he said I didn't finish anything. It hurt. And I just kind of like shut down a little bit. And I think about it now, and I'm not like, I don't have the kind of regret of like, I fucked up. Like it's more, I wish I had just been a little bit less afraid. I wish that I had made a little bit more time and a little bit more of an effort, because I didn't know he was going to be gone so soon. I think my father passed, he was 64. He was young. And Maeve, with her mother and her addiction issues, I'm certain Maeve was aware that there was a likelihood her mother wasn't going to make it too much longer. The last time Maeve saw her, she was in recovery and doing better. But unfortunately, she knew that her mother did not have this resolved. And it's part of what made me so crazy about her mother flipping out when Maeve called CPS. I get it, but she was not wrong. Her mother still had a fight ahead of her, and she was trying to behave as if, you know, being sober for 6 months or however long it had been meant that she was now a fit parent. And Maeve had just found drugs, and she's like, I made one mistake. I made one slip. Girl, it's only been several months and you've already slipped. You have to be realistic with yourself. And my father's heart attack was in large part due to the weakening of his heart from drug use when he was younger. My father dealt cocaine. He probably dealt other drugs, but he was Colombian. That was the primary. And he did a lot of blow. And it fucks your heart up if you do that too often. And my father overdosed once. So he already was like on his second chance. The overdose was really kind of the wake-up call that turned him into a regular AA going Christian fundamentalist, because he realized that's it. If I don't clean up my act, I'm out. And that shit catches up with you. You know, even if her mother had gotten clean and was able to stay clean, there is no guarantee that the health effects of what she had done to herself for so long wouldn't eventually catch up with her and cause her death to be a lot earlier than it would be otherwise. But it doesn't make it any easier, especially with Maeve and her mother and their relationship. The impression that I get is that the last time she saw her mother was the last time she spoke to her. And I may be wrong. They may have texted back and forth a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if there wasn't a sense to Maeve of wishing that she had tried to reach out more or be more supportive or anything like that. I do not think it would have helped. In fact, I think it's best for Maeve that she stay out of it. I am of the opinion it would have been unhealthy for her to try and assist her mother more than she had done already. There's a boundary that needs to be drawn, and I think she was smart in the way that she distanced herself. But that kind of uncertainty can be really difficult, especially in the wake of a very recent death. So this episode, it's Maeve kind of trying to get her mind off of her loss. And I totally understand this feeling, and it's really rough because Otis and Amy are both having their own sorts of issues that they want to bring up with Maeve. And Amy's is that she is into Isaac, and she's feeling a really weird way about it, and goes to Maeve to talk to her about it. I've got to be honest, you guys, I was genuinely surprised at how Maeve reacted. I really didn't think this was going to matter to her. I thought she would just be like, you know what, good for you and good for Isaac. I love you both and you would be great together, you know. Instead, she's like, I really can't deal with this right now. And I was sort of like, can't you? Because I know that you were kind of with Isaac for a second, but it was so brief. You haven't seen him in a while. I don't know how in touch she's stayed. I just kind of thought it wouldn't be anything. So the fact that she sort of, it's not wrong of her and by any means, but I just didn't expect this to go the way that it did. And then Otis has to bring up the thing with Ruby. And, you know, they go to this movie and just touching on this scene because it was so agonizing, you guys. Joanna, Jean's sister, goes to the movie too and is awful. Fucking awful. I really have kind of liked her even though she's a mess. And this episode made me turn a corner and just be like, fuck this bitch. I cannot take it when somebody is that kind of loud drunk in the midst of other people who are clearly not on the same page with them. And not to say that I haven't been this person, because I fucking have, but rarely. I'm just not the type to get that kind of drunk. And the fact that she sat between them, they're on a date, and it didn't even enter her mind that sitting between them wasn't the way. The only thing that I can say about the whole direction of this was that Maeve clearly enjoyed having somebody wild to take her mind off things. So in that respect, I guess it worked out briefly, but it just felt so obnoxious, so thoughtless, so selfish, really. And the whole, this is supposed to be a date between Otis and Maeve. I want to see them just be able to spend time together, and nothing works out, and it's so frustrating. And so eventually, they get out of there. Otis hasn't drunk, but Maeve has, so she's a little bit tipsy. And I've said many times that I'm not a big drinker, but after my father and grandmother both passed so close together, and they were 2/3 of my family to me, I started to drink a little bit more than was healthy. But I needed to do something. There has to be something to dull the edges a little bit. We all find our ways. Sometimes it's food, and weirdly for me, that was not working. My stomach was in such a knot. I couldn't eat the way that I, do with depression, things like that. So I am not knocking the fact that Maeve has been drinking at all. But Otis being sober and her not, it really gives a lopsided effect to the evening. And you can see that I wouldn't say that it's like bothering her that he's not drinking, but it's clear like he's not quite in the space, the headspace that she wants to be in, because he's thinking about Ruby and kind of freaking out. And so he can't relax. And so eventually they wind up breaking into their old school, and in like such a spooky sequence, you guys, I can't with this sort of thing. I am such a pussy. No. I just could never. Even being in my own school after hours was a little bit freaky. Anytime that you're in a building with like long, narrow hallways and there's nobody in the building and there's lots of reflective surfaces, lots of windows, shiny floors, there's always tricks that your eyes play, that something is standing at the end of the hall, that you saw something move. Absolutely fucking not. I could not do it. And they climbed down into the drained swimming pool, which extra no. Oh my God. I can't think of a less sexy place. That is like a horror movie. What are you doing? So they get down there and Maeve is like, we should have sex. Otis is uncomfortable because she's drunk and he feels totally weird just about that. And then there's the Ruby thing. And they start to like really make out, get undressed. And he's beginning to have like a panic attack, basically. And he stops her. And he has to blurt this out in the most Three's Company misunderstanding sort of way. Where he says, me and Ruby slept together. Why in the fuck would you say it like that? For the drama. That's the only answer. I'm sorry, but what the fuck, Otis? You don't word it like that. What do you think she's going to think immediately? I was at her house and we fell asleep on her bed. I didn't mean to. I woke up. Granted, this may mean more to him than it should, that he slept at her place, so he feels the need to tell her. Fine. But you say what it is that happened. Don't say it in words that make it sound like a completely different event. And Maeve, understandably, having just been trying to get her mind off some shit, and I will admit, I was a little uncomfortable, not only with her being drunk, but it feeling like she was sort of using Otis to take her mind off things sexually. I want her and Otis to like have sex for the first time in a way that feels like they are both fully present. And that was not the vibe here. So as much as I don't think it was exactly like unethical, I'm not saying it as far as that. I was sort of like, I hope this isn't how they have sex the first time, because this just isn't great, you know? But she just kind of is like, fuck you. And this is when they get interrupted by security, who come in, and I don't know if they like call the actual cops or if it's just security themselves that's holding them. But eventually Jean gets called to pick the two of them up. And this is the first time that she's meeting Maeve, which is hysterical. Like, I cannot get over the fact that she hasn't met Maeve after all this time yet. This is the first introduction. And it's such a weird, because like, as they say, you can only make a first impression once. And Maeve isn't, like, she gives the impression of being this type, in quotes, like the bad kid, but she isn't really this type. And it's unfortunate that this is the circumstance in which Jean meets her, because it underlines an overall vibe that Maeve has around her at all times that is sort of misleading. So it feels like Jean is going to see Maeve as the difficult girlfriend, the problem. And I hate that, because she doesn't deserve that. And I was in this position once where I was just seeing this guy for the first time. Not the first date, but it was like really early in the relationship. And he had too much to drink this one night, and I drove him home But I had also had too much to drink, much less than him. And I thought that I was mostly fine, but I really wasn't. And it was icy and I was driving too fast and I got lost. So I began to panic and I drove extra fast trying to find a sign to point me to like in where I even was, because I was in a completely unfamiliar town in a rural area. So it was all trees and everything looked the same. And I began to freak and drove faster and faster, and I spun out and I hit a tree, and it was really bad. I'm really lucky that I didn't get hurt. Like, I was fine, and it was a miracle. And my aunt and uncle, who I was living with at the time, did not think much of this gentleman because of what had happened to me. They felt like the fact that we had both been drinking and he let me drive, that I had chosen to drive drunk when I had never displayed that sort of behavior before. They felt like it was a reflection on him, which, like, truthfully, they weren't totally wrong. I really did drink more with him than I have with anybody because it turned out he was an alcoholic. But I didn't realize it at the time because in your early 20s, drinking is part of the, like, early 20s culture, you know? That's just part of what people do at that age, is they drink too much and party a lot. So I wasn't seeing it for what it was. And I just thought, oh, I was just having a good time. And so they had this impression of him, but they had never actually met him. So the first time they met him, I gave him a completely different name and pretended that he was gay and that it was a totally different person. And that we were just friends and that there was nothing like between us. And they believed it until one day he was a chef and they were at a chili cook-off in town and the chefs all had their photos next to their entries in the chili contest. And they saw his photo with his name and came home and were like, so Natasha, we've found out about your friend whose name is not what you said. And let me tell you, when somebody already doesn't have a good impression of a person, creating a whole fake identity for them doesn't make it better once it's found out. It just makes him look extra bad. It was a terrible situation, you guys. I think about this and laugh so hard because he was a menace. Like, it was a relationship that went on far too long. I very nearly married him. He got me pregnant. And I'm so glad to this day that I got an abortion. Like, that is one of those things that I just thank you, Jesus, that there was an abortion option, because I can't imagine what my life would have been if I had been forced to have that child. And it's just really like they had an idea about who he was. And unfortunately, in the long run, it seems like they were kind of not wrong about him. But in the short term, I was like, no, they're going to judge him about this. I have to figure out a way around it. So, Ashleigh says, I'm like that around loss. I've had a lot of control issues around food. So when it comes to losing someone and being so out of control in that way, when my nanny died, I went a whole week without eating. Not recommended, obviously, but it did kind of make me feel like I had a small victory. I don't know. How weird is it, though, that this is the first time Maeve and Jean are meeting? I know, right? Oh my God. And then Ashleigh has put some laugh emojis, I'm assuming because of this story about my dude. But yeah, anyway, all of this, I've got to get a move on the other plots in this episode because there's many other things happening. But I am just really wondering what Jean's going to make of this, because she can be very open-minded in some ways. She can have good judgment at times. She knows Otis fairly well, but you know, it's a dicey situation. And also, Otis is really, really pissy with her for having this radio show with O, who it turns out they want to have be a regular, which I sort of wondered if that was going to happen. And I couldn't help but laugh at the fact that, like, as much as I think he has talked about her to his mother, I don't know if he has said what her name is. I don't remember. But I at least felt like, you have to know your mother didn't get to choose this, right? Like, don't throw her this attitude when you know she has bosses who decide these things. You haven't even talked to her, and he was just such a dick to her about it. But anyway, so that's that with Maeve and Otis. There is a whole, like, other situation here that we start off in the very beginning of the episode with this, the boss that Jean, I can't remember what this woman's name is, Ashleigh. But she's about to try and use a vibrator that looks like a corn cob. And she has lube that is like butter looking lube. It is wild. This to me looks terrible. Like, it does not look like something that would feel good. To each their own. I'm sure for her it works, but I was definitely sort of like, weird, okay. And evidently her lube is out, and so she is going around the kitchen looking for literally anything. And the kitchen is unlit. So she's just walking around and she sees something by the light of the fridge light. And she picks it up without checking the label, assuming, I think, that it's just olive oil. And she puts it between her legs, and at first she's like, there we go. And then she starts to realize, oh shit. And later on, I'm assuming her son or roommate, I don't know, comes down and is like, what are you doing with my chili oil? It's his mother. What were you doing with my chili oil? And she's like freaking out, just spraying whipped cream down her pants because of the burning. Same dude as the previous story. One time had been slicing jalapenos, thought he had washed his hands more thoroughly than he did, and jerked off. And let me tell you, he felt that for a few hours. It was not awesome. Let's see. Ashley says, I think it's Hannah Gadsby. I know she's definitely a British comedian. Yes, character's name is Celia Thomas. Okay, Celia, thank you. So that's the opening scene, and it's very funny. She winds up talking to Jean about this a little bit later and just is flat out like, here's what happened. So let's jump ahead a little bit to Jackson and Viv, because Viv's thing has been developing slowly in the background, and I have not talked about it all that much. But there's this dude that she's seeing who, in my opinion, is just a bag of red flags. He seems nice enough in a vague, sort of bland way. But every time that he sees Viv with Jackson, he reacts poorly. He's just very easily threatened. And it felt like very much for me, any time that you have a person who is coming into something, knowing already that two people are friends, and expecting their partner to change that because now they're in that person's life, I feel like that's just always bad news. Like, oh my God, really, Ashleigh? His name is Beau. I'm so sorry, but that is nonsense. I love that. That almost, because, like, you know, you guys, the word beau just can mean like boyfriend or suitor. I like to think that the writers were just like, I don't know, just name him Beau because he's just not really like that important. We're just going to have him perform this function. But he, like, at the very least, I'll give him credit on the fact that he asks her about Jackson and whether there's something going on with him up front. He doesn't stew privately and get pissy about it. He is very immediately like, here's something that's bothering me and I'm going to communicate with you about it. So I like that. But then they go to the movie. It's going to be a date. And then Jackson, who is kind of going through this crisis with his health, even though nothing exactly is going on yet, but he's beginning to really think about his own mortality in a way that's not great for somebody his age to be in that headspace. And he wants to, like, cheer himself up, and he sees them, and she invites him, and it's like, I don't even remember, actually. Does she invite him, or if he's like, do you mind if I tag along? But it really doesn't have to be a thing. I will say, I can understand feeling left out because of the jokes that she and Jackson are making during the movie. If you're not involved in those, it feels very much like inside jokes. That can be kind of a bummer. You know, I'm not trying to say his feelings aren't somewhat valid, but there is just a a way that he smolders about it and then immediately is like, okay, I'm leaving, and gets up and walks out, that felt really childish and reactive to me. I didn't like it. And then once they're outside and she's like, I'm sorry, you know, he's just my friend. You don't need to worry about it. And he says something like, I worry that you don't know how great you are. And it felt super manipulative to me. I really don't want to be the kind of person that hears somebody saying a positive thing to their partner and gets suspicious out of the gate, because I feel like that's, you know, that's not awesome. But I can't lie, you guys. I had a real moment of kind of, is that what you worry about? That she doesn't know how great she is? That doesn't feel like your concern right now. It feels like you expect 100% of her attention all the time, and you feel that you are due that attention. And if she doesn't give it to you, she's doing something wrong. And if that's what you think, you really got to get a understanding of the fact that a relationship isn't somebody's only interaction. Like, romantic relationships aren't. This is sort of what I'm wondering if this is the case for Beau. He seems to have his own friends, so I don't think so. But does he believe that she should just not have friends outside of her boyfriend once she has a boyfriend? Because there are some people out there who really believe you can be friends with somebody of the opposite sex without there being some kind of attraction. And the truth is, even if there is some kind of attraction, so do you just not trust your partner to that level? Really? Like, that's sad for you. You know, Miles is one of my best friends. And I'm not going to try and pretend that, like, when I was first divorced, that there wasn't a moment where Miles was kind of like, hey, what's up? You know, like, there was a little bit of, well, maybe with Miles, like, for a second. And it never materialized. We both got married, and Owen would not think a thing of it if I were to go spend the day hanging out with Miles. I don't think he would be threatened in the least. That's like adult relationships, man. And I just don't want her to be so caught up in somebody liking her to the degree this kid seems to, gassing her up the way that he is. I don't want her to fall into a weird expectation that he will slowly set her up and like trick her into thinking is reasonable, you know? Ashleigh says, I've never noticed it before, but in the scene where he's walked her to school, after she's walked off and Viv and Jackson are chatting, you can see him turning back and checking on her a few times. Yeah. This is sort of what I'm saying. It's like, I like that he talks to her, but it just feels like he is almost monitoring her in a way that I find deeply suspect. I think it's like a little paranoid on his part. The fact that he has already talked about her to his father, as much as you want to see this as just a cute thing, I think he barely knows her yet. And for him to already be talking about her, it feels really, really premature. And I'm not even trying to make a comment on his relationship with his dad. It's not even about that. It's more about the fact that he was like saying more than just, there's this cute girl I'm thinking about asking out. You know, it sounds like from the way he describes talking about her, like there's more, that he's saying more than would really be warranted based on the number of times they met. And I can't help but wonder how much of that is just him watching her throughout the day, you know? But anyway, so yeah, it ends with like the two of them sort of making up outside the movie theater and him being like, you know, it's, I would just like to spend some time with you. And so Viv leaves with him and Jackson is left in the movie theater by himself, which I just really felt shitty about. That, like, even though it's this dude tries to act like it's not a big deal, he gets his way in the end and gets her to ditch Jackson. I don't feel like it was necessarily the wrong thing to do if it were an isolated incident. I do feel like it's setting a precedent that is likely going to happen again. And I'm worried about it. So that's what's going on there. And there is then this whole thing with Eric, and he is talking to Abby about using the fundraising money for the soup kitchen thing. And he's like, the two of them are talking about how even though they are queer and there's sort of like a weird relationship between queers and the church, that perhaps this is something that will bridge the gap a little bit and leave the two of them like, it will just sort of create a better relationship there. And then we see Eric seeing Otis. And I was sort of, I was really worried about things with the two of them in a way that isn't actually addressed in the show. Because you guys know, like last episode, Otis takes off to see Maeve, doesn't tell Eric, and is like MIA for at least that day, if not the next day as well. And because I think when we start the episode, we find out it's been a couple of days that they have taken off from school and they really need to start like going again. And I was expecting for there to be a moment where Eric finds out that Maeve's mother died and is like, oh, never mind, I'm not upset anymore. But instead it starts off with Eric being like, hey, I wanted to apologize about the club because it was awkward and not nice and I feel terrible. And it was a sort of like, I appreciate it. I don't feel like he really has that much to apologize for, but Ruby kind of told him Otis felt uninvited, basically. And so he feels the need to make it right. And I totally respect that. But once again, Eric is trying to talk to Otis, and Otis is completely in his own head and not really hearing him. And just cuts him off with like, it probably wasn't even my thing. Don't even worry about it. But I need to tell you something. It happened that night and I'm feeling really weird about it. And that's when he explains about Ruby and how we fell asleep together. Nothing happened, but we were just in the same bed. And Eric is just sort of like, have you told Maeve? And he says, well, we weren't really speaking when it happened. And I know it didn't mean anything, but I need to tell her. But her mom's just fucking died, so I don't know. And Eric is just like, look, the longer you don't say anything, the more of a secret it will seem. And I was like, true. This is when Otis says, how was the club? And Eric says, it was amazing. I got with the hottest guy ever. Telling him this story, very excited about it. And Otis gets totally sidetracked because he turns and sees O's name on like the projector. And that she is up there as like the host of sexology, even though she was only up there one time. And she comes rolling up on her scooter and literally rides in circles around him, taunting him for a moment. And all of a sudden, Otis is admitting that he has completely forgotten about the debate. And he runs away to talk to Ruby. Eric was mid-sentence, literally mid-sentence. And he's like sprinting off. Eric, go with your queer friends. You deserve better, buddy. You just do. I'm sure Otis can become a better friend in time. But as of right now, he is just on notice. As far as I am concerned, it's not enough. And I'm pretty pissy about it, to be honest. So anyway, I am going to jump ahead to the actual debate. Because what they decide to do, Otis and Ruby, like Ruby is trying to dig up dirt. We saw the weirdness with how Aisha. Oh, I finally got it, you guys. Aisha had brought like started to bring up something and Abby shut her down. And I am assuming at this point, because I was weirded out by that whole interaction, and now I'm realizing, oh, Abby knew what Aisha was going to say. And even though it's just Aisha's lived experience, Abby's attitude is no negativity, so we're not going to say anything. And I'm like, that's what she experienced, though. Like, or not, it actually turns out to not have been Aisha. It was Aisha's partner, who I can't remember their name. So that's pretty shitty that Abby is out here trying to completely shut people down who are not, quote, gossiping. They are trying to express something that happened to them. And ew, that's none of your business. You don't get to have that, like, call. Anyway, you don't hear exactly what went down. You just, like, see Aisha and her partner hailing down Ruby to tell her something. And then eventually it turns out that more than one person has this story. But when we go to the actual debate, what we get is this really weird combo of events that, for me, felt very, very flat. And I didn't believe any of it for a second. This was probably, for me, overall, one of the most frustratingly written episodes of this show to date. There have been episodes that I have gotten really pissed about the way they were handled ultimately, like Eric getting beaten up and it feeling like he never really actually gets that resolved and talks to Otis about it. This was more like a feeling of they didn't know what to do and were grasping at straws as writers, because the debate makes very little sense. And what it turns out to kind of be is just like a total mudslinging session. And I wasn't realizing that's what it was going to be. I thought it was going to be the sort of thing where people all, like, they each try and make their case about why they're the most qualified, and maybe they're asked like some questions about sexuality as like almost a test, and they have to give correct answers or demonstrate the breadth of their knowledge and understanding, things like that. Instead, what happens? O goes up there and she throws Otis's father's book in his face, which truly, you guys, this was like, so, it felt for me, and I don't think this is actually the case because the entire energy of this show flies in the face of what I'm saying, but that's kind of what I mean about the writing not being good, because if it feels like this, which is so tonally off from the rest of the show, something's wrong here. What it felt like they were kind of doing was like a cancel culture commentary and how unfair it can be. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't people out there who do immediately jump down people's throats over shit that I don't think is fair or something that they deserve to get basically mudslinged about. There are people like that. But cancel culture, for the most part, is totally valid. People are getting, quote, canceled. It's not even, like, they're still out here having fucking Netflix specials and making thousands and millions of dollars. Like, it's not real. However, the reasons that many people get canceled are fucking valid. They're rapists and assaulters and abusers. I am not sorry. But what this felt like was, we've got to like come up with something that she can say that feels valid about Otis, and that way she can get everybody to cancel him, and we can like watch him be maligned in a way that we know isn't exactly true, and it will be very like cheap and frustrating. And it just, to me, the people at this school do not seem like the types to fall for this okey doke with O trying to tie Otis's behavior in with his father's ethos in his book. it was such a weak connection because like she quotes his father extensively and it's like, this is his son. And I'm just sort of like, and Otis entirely discounts everything that his father has said. And is like, I don't believe any of that. I'm thinking exactly like, this is a nothing argument. And then eventually O gets to the point of like, I feel like the way that you have treated me is sexist. And, you know, there was a part of me that did kind of notice that both Eric and Otis assumed whoever his competition was before they met O was going to be a dude. So there was that, like, you know, that implied by, but I do not believe that his reaction to everything is because O's a woman. He was just as angry when he thought it was a guy. So to me, obviously that's not what's going on. And the fact that everybody kind of like buys this argument is really, really, it didn't seem like she made a solid enough case for everybody to immediately agree the way that they seem to have done. Ashleigh says, I think they edited it around a lot, to be honest. I've read a lot about changes made to O. She was supposed to be a lot more nuanced, but I don't think the writers trusted the audience, to be honest. The writer who made O was very disappointed because she was excited to add an asexual woman of color into a mainstream Netflix show, and then they flipped it to prop up Otis's character. Interesting. The thing with O, and I'm interested now because the fact that you have meant, because Ashleigh, I think that was a little bit of a spoiler, but you wouldn't know that I would consider it a little bit of a spoiler, because here's what I was thinking. O's like response to Otis saying everybody has, like, all these people have said that you have ghosted them and you've treated them really poorly, is for O to come forward and say, I'm asexual and I treated these people badly because I wasn't feeling the way that I thought I was supposed to feel about them. And they were trying to take things to another level. And I was uncomfortable with that. And I couldn't understand why. And I just ditched them. And it was shitty. And I'm sorry. I am growing to understand that I'm asexual and coming to terms with that. And I really thought this was a lie. I really was like, oh, come now. I felt like it was a really great explanation, but it felt insincere. And it felt like she was coming up on the spot with a believable and sympathetic, especially to this audience, reason why she treated these people badly. When in fact, she's just kind of shitty. And she was like, you know what? I'm going to say this thing because, you know, we haven't seen evidence to the contrary. And that it was going to like come out eventually that O is not asexual, that she was just trying to duck out of some bad behavior and put a fucking political spin on it. And when I say political spin, I don't mean her identity being political. I mean like this is a debate between the two of them and this is sort of politics, you know? So Ashleigh says, sorry, I never even thought of that, but to be honest, I can understand why you see it as a spoiler. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Like, if it turns out she is asexual, but I think that the way that they've written O, I just don't trust her, and that whole scene felt very sus to me. And so it's interesting that, like, I'm coming at it from this angle of just like, yeah, you're full of shit. Because I just have a bias against her at this point. With O, I'm seeing her as the bitch eating crackers. No matter what she does, I am going to be like, look at this fucking bitch eating those fucking crackers like the bitch she is. I'm just like there mentally right now. So her coming up with this explanation, it just felt so like convenient to the energy of the school being very heavy on like acceptance and reassurance and rallying behind her in this way, that I felt like she was playing to what she knows is important to these people and getting out of bad behavior yet again. Because I am still blown away by the fact that O tried to pretend she didn't recognize Ruby. That for me keeps coming up. I keep being like, you're really saying, I'm so sorry. Have we met? Like, she says that in the hallway, something like that. And Ruby just says, oh my God, can you stop pretending that you don't know who I am? And O looks suitably ashamed and guilty. But the fact that she not only did what she did in the first place, which is unforgivable, as far as I'm concerned, I would just not be able to get over that. It would never even occur to me to do something so cruel. And I know that maybe I'm an oversensitive kid. I probably was. But like, oh my God. And combined with the absolute lack of remorse that we see as an adult, if she actually felt bad about what she had done, straight up denying you know who this person is certainly not the way to get that across. So I'm so stuck on that and her behavior with Ruby that it has colored and tainted absolutely all of her other actions. And I just, overall, the whole way that this goes, with the way that people believe the worst of Otis off of a very weak argument, in my opinion, and then Otis saying something that I thought was twisting to look a certain way to make him look even worse, it all just felt so, like, oversimplified and easy. And so the episode ends with Otis being, like, called a misogynist, and people, like, in the comment sections just talking about how, like, O is so brave, and I can't believe that he put her on the spot like this. And so she's getting tons of flowers, and he is basically persona non grata. And that's how it wraps with the two of them. And I was just so disappointed because, like, you know, there's this whole sense of Ruby being like, oh, I've got dirt. You wait until you hear this. And then it just turns out to be that she ghosted a few people. And I was like, that's it? That's your, like, your big gotcha? It just didn't feel like enough. So anyway, Ashleigh says, yeah, I definitely agree. It felt like she was weaponizing asexuality, but it never crossed my mind the writers would have a character fake asexuality because a lot of people don't accept asexuality as valid to begin with. I think I was giving the show more credit in that I felt like it went against the premise of the show to educate viewers. I see what you mean. They've had an asexual character was it the first season? But I understand what you mean because it is definitely very underrepresented. But I just, like I said, felt a way about O, and that's like my bias against her at this point. I'm glad, honestly, to hear that it turns out that she is, because I hated the thought, but I really believed that was what was going on. So I'm sort of relieved that it's not going to turn out she's so despicable as to make that up to get out of a thing, because that's super shitty. So anyway, that's the way things go with O and Otis, and the two of them just, like, you know, back and forth for the whole day about who is. It's like the fact that she was on the show with his mother. It's really funny because, like, who his mother is, he could bring that up in his defense. And I kind of wanted him to do that. When she brings up his father, I wanted him to be like, I live with my mother, whose show you were a guest on. So I think it's interesting that you assume I'm more like my father, who I have hardly any contact with, than with somebody that you admire and emulate so much that you're using the name of her show to get your name out there and show off. You keep talking about sexology. Who do you think I learned everything from? The person you claim to respect and joined for a conversation. I feel like if he had turned it that way, which would have been very easy to do, especially after the fuss she's making about having been on the show, it would have been open and shut, you know, and that would be a wrap on that. But evidently he just is caught so off guard, and to a degree I get that. Like, that can happen when we all know this, you're in the moment and you're so shocked by the direction a conversation takes that you later on are like, I cannot believe I didn't say XYZ. Oh my God. Because in the moment, you're just so, you're taking, your brain is like busy processing the fact that we're going down this road, and it hasn't caught up to like logical refuting, you know? It's just still, wait, did they just say that? So I'm not like mad at him. I just, missed opportunity there. Oh God, you guys, I forgot. There's the whole thing with Maeve, and I'm going to kind of skip over this because it was such a bummer. But her and her brother go to like look at funeral arrangements for their mother, and it's clearly going to be a fortune. And he, it turns out, is using again, and they have like this huge argument, and she shoves him and calls him a fucking idiot. And he says, get off your high horse. You might be smarter than me, but we came from exactly the same shithole. And I'm like, yeah, you did. And she's doing way better than you, bruv. So how are you going to try and throw that in her face when actually that's kind of the point, is that she's, you know, and it's difficult because when you've got siblings that are aged apart and different genders, they are going to have had different experiences with the same parent. And so I am really curious if the mother that Maeve grew up with is the same kind of mother that he had. Was it good for a while and then turned a corner, or was she always shitty? And what's the deal with her father? Do they have the same father? Did he know his father at all? Like, there are a lot of factors to consider when it comes to why people from the same family wind up going in such different directions. And I'm talking about just aside from basics and differences of personality, you know? I don't get the impression Sean is stupid. He actually seems very smart. It just feels like he has taken the easiest way out because, in the words of Jeff from Community, when you reach a certain place in life, if you're smart enough, you start to realize that you can kind of get away with doing as little as possible. And like, I kind of feel like that's the direction he took. You go one of two ways, where you're used to things being easy because you're good at gaming the system, and so you kind of get lazy, or you realize, hey, I've got something, and work harder because of it. And he feels just like he's gone a complete opposite direction. But I don't know how they're paying for this funeral. I appreciated that it was pointed out just how expensive it is, because like, funerals are a fucking fortune, kids. And it is sick. Like, the whole industry around health and death in the world, the US is a particular offender, but the world in general, it is so gross. So anyway, this is, let's jump over to the scene where Jean, she gets told that they want O to be a regular, and she tries to, say like, I really want to give this another shot by myself. And Celia's like, look, I'm sorry, but it's just, you know, it's too late. Like, and I really think, honestly, Jean is the kind of person that does better with a partner. And I mean, I don't feel like she would be unlistenable if she were in a better place mentally, because, you know, the whole thing with her kid, she's just fucked up right now. So she's just not in a great place to host solo anyway. But even in the best of times, Jean can take herself too seriously and has difficulty with like really listening. And I think she's the type that does better with a partner. And this is for the best in its way. But I can also understand feeling like something was yours and now you're being asked to share because you weren't good enough, which there's just no arguing with that, how that feels. You know, that's just, I would feel this way also. Personally, I'm just going to say, it's wild to me that you guys enjoy listening to me talking solo. I'm very, like, I'm glad, I feel blessed about that I'm able to host this show the way that I do. But there's like two people in the world that I think I could listen to just talk alone for an hour or more. And the fact that y'all enjoy listening to me go on and on by myself enough to listen at all or commission me, if you're somebody who commissions me, truly wild. So I am running out of time. I'm out of time, actually. What am I saying? But there is the one thing that I want to touch on before we wrap this up. There's a couple of other plot lines that I have really not like given due time to, but suffice to say, Eric has kind of like a awakening at a church choir service. I loved this. Like, the music was not for me at all. Really wasn't feeling it myself, but I just loved the moment of him like being sort of everything transcending and him melting into the music and the light. I just thought that was beautifully done. And I really hope that he like gets involved with this because it just feels like him. I don't know what kind of voice he has, but I'm assuming it's great. And then there's the whole thing with Jean and being offered drugs by the doctor and getting really like defensive about this suggestion. And you know, let's see, birthing parents who previously struggled with mental health are more susceptible to postnatal depression. Would you consider trying some medication? And Jean says, thank you, but I know my hormones are all over the place, and I have been through this before, and I got through it without medication, and I'd like to try that again. Now, look, I respect just not wanting to do things a certain way that you're unfamiliar with. I understand. But I just have to say, I was deeply disappointed that she, I won't call her a medical professional. She's not. But as somebody as familiar with the human body as she is, doesn't understand the brain chemistry changes. Like, you're talking about your hormones as if, oh, it's just hormones, and therefore, because I know what it is, it no longer affects me. Because I can say it's hormones, suddenly I don't feel it the same way that I'm feeling. No, just because you know why does not change the effect. You are depressed and you know why, and they have a thing that can actually help you now that you know why. The fact that you know why is what should point you toward the drug, actually. Eventually, she gets there in the conversation about menopause with her boss. But in the moment, I just wanted to slap and shake her. Again, she is a huge control freak, so it reads as true. I think this is completely within character for her to, like, say no and then think about it later and realize. But in the moment, oh my God, I was so irritated with her. So it seems like she later on has a kind of a breakdown and is just in her bed crying and finally calls the doctor and is like, I really need to, see her after all and get a prescription. And I appreciate this. I hate seeing her as just, what's the word? I mean, saying depressed does not feel like it is enough. It's after Otis, like, chews her out in a way that felt deeply unfair. And he's talking about how much she's struggling. And then, like, dude, and he says something about how she has left him behind because he needs a mom. And so part of me felt like him saying that she hasn't been there for him is what's motivating her more than her own emotions at that point, which I suppose it doesn't matter. But I just felt like his accusation there was so cruel that I didn't want it to have that kind of effect. I just hated that for her. So anyway, Ashleigh says, I don't know if you saw the dedication at the end, but this episode was dedicated to Shea Patton Walker. They were a trans activist who worked as a gender consultant on the show and were brought on to develop Cal. Oh, that's nice. Wait, you say they were. Oh, did they die? Oh, that's a bummer. That's sad. Well, I'm sorry to end it on a sad note, everybody, but Shay Patton Walker, thank you for all that you did, because Cal's an important character. I'm so over time. Oh my God. I got to wrap. Thank you guys again so much for listening. And oh God, Ashleigh says they passed away from suicide age 24 in 2022. Y'all, there's nothing to be said about suicide that isn't always said, but don't leave. We need you here. Even if you think that I saying this do not know you personally, and so I can't be saying this to you, hear me. We all need you here. Don't go. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.